the subject of re-exports and offshore transactions. Next, please. So for those of you who are involved purely with exporting, you're in the United States, you export things from the United States, and it goes to your customer, and that's all you do. That's all you do. Then this section's not going to be as significant for you uh, when you're in that kind of a situation. Now, however, if you're an exporter and you export to distributors around the world, to your customers, and once they get the item, sometimes they are going to get involved in this part of our regulations, and sometimes you might have to help them understand how to comply with them just as a favor. Or if you know have most of you have, or actually a lot of companies have manufacturing facilities overseas, and if you have things manufactured overseas to your company and they're sent from there to other countries around the world, those are called exports from abroad. So what this is all about is we're trying to, again, teach you when you're subject to the export administration regulations. Remember, on exporting, if your item's in the United States and it's going to leave the United States, you're subject to the AR. Simply put as that. With offshore transactions, it's not so cut and dried. And so we're going to talk about uh, how you figure that out. We have some great examples, and um, so let's take a look at what we're going to talk about here. So um, U.S. origin items, in other words, if it goes to another country that are subject to the AR, foreign-made. Now we're going to talk about foreign-made items that contain a certain percentage of controlled U.S. content. Remember, Lanny talked about general prohibitions. We're going to talk about general prohibition number 2 and number 3. General prohibition number 2 is all about controlled U.S. content, a percentage of controlled U.S. content that may subject you to the EAR with your particular transaction. Then we're going to take a look at um, General Prohibition 3, foreign made direct items that are direct products of U.S. technology and software, General Prohibition number 3. And the other one about foreign plants. So don't get all panicky yet. We're going to get deeper into this. It's very complicated to explain. That's why we've created examples, and that's why we have questions. At the end, any questions you can ask me when you have fact patterns if you're dealing with this at your office as we move forward. Next, please. So we're going to focus first on general prohibition number 2, the de minimis rule. De minimis basically means, it's a Latin word that means of little significance, of little note. So it's a small percentage, basically. So basically, if you are um, re-exporting or exporting from abroad, incorporating more than a de minimis, quote unquote, amount of controlled U.S. content, then you may be subject to the export administration regulations. And what do we mean by incorporating? We talk about, things that are essential to the functioning of the equipment, uh, things that are customarily included with the sale, and re-export with non-US made items. So controlled US content, what do we mean by controlled US content? Again, we have in the quotation marks, whenever we have quotation marks, that is defined in part 772 of the if not, it's in 734 in this case. But that means that it would require an export license to the ultimate destination country if it's controlled US content. Even the EAR 99 items could be controlled to certain destinations. So for example, a lot of EAR 99 items, for example, would be controlled going to Iran because they're a sanctioned and embargoed country. And so again, we have our citations down below, 734.4 and supplement number 2 to part 734 and supplement number 1 to part 740. Those are all the sections that are going to help you put all this together. We've evolved quite a ways from the beginning. So let's move forward, especially on the foreign direct product rule. Next slide, please. So we're going to make sure you understand a couple concepts very clearly, because this is what is important for you to know when you try to figure out if you're subject to the Export Administration regulations. So I'm going to read some of these things off the screen here, but before I read them, I want you to put in front of what I'm saying these words. You are not subject to the EAR when, based on the fair market value, the de minimis level is 25% or less controlled. You're also not subject to the EAR when 10% or less de minimis content is going to be involving Cuba, Iran, North Korea, and Syria. Those are country group E countries. So if you ever go to the Commerce country chart, that's how you tell who's on what country group. Now, these are for our legacy items. We call them legacy items because they were before the 600 series. 600 series are the U.S. munitions items that came over from the State Department. So there's 0% de minimis for certain 600 series items. In other words, it doesn't have to be, even 1%. It's automatically going to be subject to the AR. And it's all going to be based on all the details of your transaction. You just can't say yes or no simply on a lot of things. You've got to go down, do your due diligence, and we're going to do that today. Next, please. So we're going to do an example of general prohibition number 2 using the de minimis rule with an example that does happen. So we have a military aircraft. Okay, this is the kind of the overview of what we're doing here. So we're going to have a fact pattern I'm going to talk about. We have a military aircraft, cargo aircraft, a 9A610. It's going to be manufactured in Brazil. On that Brazil-built U.S. military cargo aircraft, they're going to be installing U.S.-built military aircraft engines. The ECCN for that is 9A619. They're going to be installed on the aircraft in Brazil. So they're building the aircraft in Brazil in 9A610, but 9A619 American aircraft engines are going to be sent to Brazil and put and installed in Brazil. The completed military cargo aircraft is then going to be exported from abroad, from Brazil to Germany. So what we're going to do is work on determining, is this transaction going to be subject to the EAR? Next slide, please. And to do that, you go into the regulations in supplement number 2 to part 734, and you're going to find we have a formula for calculating the de minimis calculation. It's a fair market value of the U.S. origin controlled content divided by the fair market value of the foreign made product, equaling the de minimis content. So we're going to show you right now how to do that in this example. Next, please. So let's just say the engines are valued at $60 million. Now it's a cargo aircraft, so each engine might be, 10 or $15 million each. So the engines are valued at $60 million, and the aircraft sells for $200 million around the world. So assume the engines are the only controlled U.S. content on the aircraft. So in order to calculate the de minimis level of aircraft, we're going to calculate that and see if it's subject to the AR. So to make the math easy, we're going to just divide 60 by 20. Next, please. Oh, I said that incorrectly. Anyway, when you divide 60 million by 200 million, you get 0.30. 0.30 is 30%. 60 by 200, sorry. I wasn't a math major, as you can tell. So so to make this math easier, you divide 60 by 200 instead of 60 million by 200 million. Who wants to work with all those zeros, right? So 60 divided by 200 is going to get you 0.30. 0.30 equals 30%. What do we say about things that are over 25% controlled U.S. content? Next slide, please. that means it's going to be subject to the EAR because it's over 25% controlled US content. So that's a basic overview of that. So let's go into General Prohibition 3, the foreign direct product rules. And over here, this is a whole different ballgame. Now, we used to have literally one foreign direct product rule when I began here a couple of years ago. And now we have 9. So we're going to go over, we're going to do one example from those 9, but we're going to show you what the 9 are. And it all depends on many different factors. As you can see here, you need to take a look at these various areas of the EAR, 736, 742, 744, 746, 764 of the EAR, depending on your situation. Next, please. So again, initially, we used to only have the national security FTP rule at the top. And that was it. And now, as time has gone on, and the US government has observed that other countries in the world and parties of concern have tried to do things to evade our foreign policy goals. We've created foreign direct product rules to foster US national security and foreign policy interests. So we're going to talk about, in this particular case, we're going to do an example of the third one down, the 600 series foreign direct product rule. And what's really important about determining whether you're subject to the EAR based on the foreign direct product rules is, in many cases, it's country scope and end user scope in some cases. But also, as you go down further down the line, it also gets into product scope as well. So let's go down. So the national security FTP rule, the 9X515 FTP rule, X is a placeholder for one of the 5 product groups. So it could be 9A515, which is a satellite, or 9E515, for example, which would be technology to build a satellite, for example. And we have 600 series rules. We have entity list rules. So if you're dealing with someone on the entity list, that's when you start going down that path. If you've got something going to Russia or Belarus, you start looking at that. In that case, if it's a military in use for Russia, Belarus, you check that. If you've got advanced computing FTP rule, that's if you have to check out what kind of ECCNs you're involved with. That usually has very high level ECCNs and supercomputers and stuff. We have the supercomputer rule and the Iran foreign direct product rule. So a lot of these things have to do with, okay, the country scope, and then, where's it going to go afterwards? So let's take a look at another fact pattern here. Next, please. So in this case, we have technology in the United States, 9E619. So that's the technology on how to build a military aircraft engine that's subject to the EAR. And that technology is going to be sent over to Brazil again. And Brazil is going to use that technology to build that US military engine. And then once they do that, they're going to ship that US military engine, jet engine, to Germany. And so the question is that engine subject to the Export Administration regulations? So remember, assume that technology, in this case, 9E, is the only controlled US content. And it's controlled for national security reasons. So let's go to the next, and this is all about General Prohibition number 3 now. And let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. So we're using a 600 series item, and so it's going to go to Germany. And is it subject to the Export Administration regulations? And if so, is there a license required? So first we have to take a look at, okay, The Brazilian engines manufactured based on U.S. controlled technology. The Brazilian engine's 9A619. The Brazilian engine is being re-exported to Germany. So the question is Germany, and you look under the country groups, the end user scope, it says if it's going to go to country groups D1, D3, D4, D5, E1, or E2, then that's going to make it subject to the export administration regulations. So if you go into supplement number 1 to part 740 where the country groups are, and you go, okay, let me see if Germany is a member of any of these country groups, you're going to find that Germany is not a member of any of those country groups. And because Germany is not a member of any of those country groups, this transaction, this is not subject to the AR because it's not going to a country that's listed in those country groups D1, D3, D4, D5, E1, and E2. Next, please. So, okay, now that you figured out, oh yeah, it's subject to the EAR, now what do I do? Well, then you just do like you do for normal export control transactions. So you go, okay, now that it's in Brazil, let's just say earlier with the transaction of the engine in the aircraft that was built in Brazil from the United States engines. You say, okay, since it's subject to the AR, that was 30%, it was over 25% controlled US content for the engine that was put into the aircraft that was built in Brazil. You say, okay, what's the ECCN of the aircraft? And the ECCN for the military aircraft that was built in Brazil with US military engines is 9A610. So you go to a 9A610 in the Commerce Control List. You look at the reasons for control in the column numbers. You go to the Commerce Country Chart for Germany. It's going to Germany. Is there an X in a box? Yes or no? If there's an X in a box, there's a license required. Also, you do the same thing. Is there going to be, who's involved in the transaction, what they're going to use it for? Those also could make a difference as to whether there's licensing requirements or not. We also have a decision tree tool on our website, which is also nice for you guys to take a look at involving this subject. Next, please. And you'll find that by hovering over the top of our menu there, licensing, then click on Reexports and Offshore Transactions. Next, please. And then you're going to have, this is our de minimis and direct product rules decision tree tool that helps you kind of work through things. Next, please. And this is where, and we got a few questions over the last 3 days on, what about re-export licenses and how's that work? So in this case, say the company in Brazil, they've got this U.S. aircraft and it's subject to the AR, and they would have to apply for a re-export license to Brazil. So the good news is SNAP-R is available for folks around the world to apply for re-export licenses. So that's from one foreign country to another foreign country. Again, it's not the same as the United States export licenses. If you're an export license, if you're doing an export license, you have to be in the United States, period. But if you are doing a re-export or an export from abroad and you need a license from BIS, we call those re-export licenses, and you can use SNAP-R from all over the world to apply for a re-export license. And as a reminder, you can also use SNAP-R all over the world for us to provide you a commodity classification request to tell you what your ECCN is. Other parties can also do it for you. The U.S. principal party in interest could do it, which is you, for example. If you're the company in the United States and your company in Brazil goes, hey, can you help us out? You could say, yeah, we'll do it for you if you want. But you don't have to do that. So anyway, you've got a lot more latitude with SNAP-R with re-export licenses. Next, please.